The holiday season always felt like a performance. We'd gather in my parents' house, the air thick with the smell of roasting turkey and a tension nobody was willing to name. I played my role perfectly. The steady, reliable middle child who never made a fuss. But that year, something was different. I felt the exhaustion settle deep in my bones, the kind that comes from carrying weight no one else acknowledges. We were sitting around the mahogany table, the china sparkling under the chandelier, when my younger sister, Chloe, started complaining. She was talking about her lease, how unfair landlords were, and how she just needed a little more time to get on her feet. My parents, bless their hearts, nodded sympathetically. Chloe was the creative one, the free spirit, the one who always needed help. And for the last 20 years, I had been that help. It wasn't just Chloe. It was the mortgage payment that Mom and Dad missed when Dad had his surgery, the emergency plumbing repair that happened at 2 a.m., the tuition bills that mysteriously vanished after I paid them but before anyone asked where the money came from. I had a good job, a quiet life, and a deeply ingrained sense that keeping my family stable was my responsibility. I never asked for thanks, and frankly, I never expected it. All I asked for was respect, or, at the very least, not to be treated like an afterthought. The conversation eventually shifted, as it always did, to me. My job, my quiet apartment, my life that, compared to Chloe's exciting drama, must have seemed painfully dull. Then, Mom looked directly across the table at me, her expression a mix of concern and something harder, something I couldn't quite place. "You know, honey," she said, her voice carrying across the hushed table, "we love having you here for the holidays, but you really need to start figuring out your own life. You're always hovering around, waiting for the next family thing." I felt a coldness spread through my chest. Hovering? I was here because I always felt obligated. I was here because the last emergency I covered for them meant I hadn't had a proper vacation in 3 years. I forced a tight smile. "I'm just visiting, Mom." She didn't let up. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to that serious, counseling tone. "It's time you stopped relying on us, honey. We're getting older. We can't keep carrying you. You need to stand on your own 2 feet." The words hit me not with the force of a blow, but with the chilling finality of a lock clicking shut. Stop relying on us. They had truly flipped the script in their minds. They saw me, the silent provider, as the dependent, and I didn't realize until that exact second, watching the silence of my father and sister, that they all believed it. What Mom didn't know was that the entire foundation of that holiday lunch, the house we were sitting in, and the comfortable silence between them was built on my 20 years of silence and my money. That was the moment everything changed. I knew then that I couldn't just let them believe the convenient lie. I didn't argue, I didn't raise my voice. I just felt the blood drain from my face, and the conversation suddenly became distant, muffled. Dad started talking about the football game, Chloe started checking her phone, and I sat there, utterly alone in a room full of the people I had sacrificed the most for. I managed to get through the meal, helping clear the dishes on autopilot. I kept replaying Mom's words, dissecting the phrase, "keep carrying you." It wasn't just a misinterpretation. It was a willful, active blindness to reality. They weren't just taking my help. They had erased my sacrifice and rewritten me as a burden in their family story. That night, I retreated to my old bedroom, a room that felt smaller now, realizing how much of my adult life I'd spent maintaining their comfort. The sheer weight of the 2-decade commitment settled on me. It wasn't a handful of favors, it was systemic support, a steady drip of my income diverted to keep their lives smooth. I began to feel a deep, burning shame, not because of what I had done, but because I had allowed them to humiliate me publicly over the very thing I had silently prevented. I decided to do something I hadn't done in 2 decades. I opened my mouth and let the truth leak out. Not dramatically, not yet. I started small, testing the waters, trying to find out how deep the denial ran. I cornered Dad in the den. He was relaxed, watching TV, bathed in the soft glow of the screen. "Dad," I started, trying to keep my voice steady. "I was a little hurt by what Mom said today." He waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, you know your mother. She doesn't mean anything by it. She just worries." "She said I rely on you," I pressed. "She said you can't keep carrying me." He chuckled, a weak, uncomfortable sound. "Well, you know, we're family. We look out for each other. That's just how it works." "Is that why I paid off the last half of Chloe's student loans 3 years ago?" I asked, looking directly into his eyes. The question hung there, forcing him to choose between the lie and the acknowledgement of my sacrifice. The chuckle died in his throat. He shifted in his armchair. "Well, you had the money at the time, and Chloe was struggling. She really needed that anonymous help. And the new roof last spring, the one you told everyone the insurance covered?" I didn't let him look away. I watched the realization of his guilt flicker in his eyes. He looked away, fiddling with the remote. The silence was heavy. It was the silence of shame trying to disguise itself as surprise. "It was an anonymous gift, wasn't it? We didn't want you to feel obligated." Obligated. He knew. He had always known. He just chose to use the anonymity I insisted upon to save their pride as a tool for his denial. This wasn't ignorance, it was complicity. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The family I thought was simply disorganized and financially stressed was actually capable of a calculated collective pretense. This pretense, I realized, was what had been protecting their peace of mind, not mine. The next morning, the atmosphere was thick. Mom tried to act normal, chatting about her garden club. Dad avoided eye contact. Chloe, sensing the discomfort, was especially loud and cheerful, oblivious to the emotional landmine we were standing on. I realized that my attempts to gently reveal the truth hadn't made them feel grateful or apologetic. They had just made them feel defensive, like I was spoiling the perfect picture they had painted. I knew the quiet conversation wasn't going to work. The system was rigged. If I didn't speak with irrefutable proof, they would simply spin my words, blame my hurt feelings, and return to their comfortable illusion. I had been quiet for too long, letting my actions speak for themselves, and they had interpreted my silence as passive weakness they could exploit. But I didn't realize how deep their accusation of me relying on them really went until Chloe mentioned the trust. "It's not like you'll ever need the inheritance anyway," she commented casually, reaching for another piece of toast. "The ones who need it. That was me, apparently, the burden." I took a deep breath. I knew exactly what I had to do now. I was done being the silent martyr. They needed a reckoning. I spent the next hour in my old bedroom, not packing, but compiling. I went through old emails, bank transfer statements, and scanned invoices. I put them all onto a secure cloud drive, categorized and dated. I printed only the summary sheet, a single, damning page detailing the total amount I had contributed over the last 20 years. The number was astronomical. It was the equivalent of a second, smaller house. I walked back downstairs, my hands slightly trembling, the single sheet of paper folded crisp in my back pocket. It was time to end the performance. They were all in the living room, settling in for the afternoon. I stood in the doorway, blocking the light. "I need to talk to all of you," I said. my voice low and steady. It was the tone I used at work when a serious project had gone off the rails. It immediately silenced them. Mom looked annoyed. What is it now? Can't it wait? No, it can't. I walked into the room, stopping right in front of the coffee table. Yesterday, Mom told me to stop relying on this family. She said you couldn't keep carrying me. Chloe rolled her eyes. Seriously, you're still upset about that? I am, I said, because the reason I come here, the reason I haven't taken a vacation in 3 years, and the reason Dad had his surgery without massive debt is the same reason I am sitting here right now. I pulled the folded paper from my pocket and laid it flat on the coffee table. Before you talk about who is carrying whom, I want you to look at this number. I tapped the total at the bottom of the page. That is the cumulative amount spanning 20 years that I have transferred, paid directly, or covertly covered for this family. It includes the $40,000 for Chloe's loans, the $12,000 for the new roof last year, and, yes, the majority of Dad's medical deductible, among other things. The silence this time was truly absolute. It wasn't defensive, it was shock. Dad's face went pale. Mom reached a hesitant hand toward the paper, her eyes wide. You said you didn't want us to know the amounts, Dad whispered, clearly panicked. I didn't, I confirmed. I wanted to protect your dignity, but you chose to destroy mine instead. You didn't just forget my generosity, you actively framed me as a dead weight. Chloe finally spoke, her voice laced with confusion and anger. Why would you keep track of all that? Are you trying to hold it over our heads? No, I said, meeting her eyes. I kept records for my own accounting, but I brought them out today because of the trust. Then I looked at my mother. You mentioned yesterday that you've restructured the family trust to prioritize the ones who need it, meaning Chloe, and you are going to disinherit me, the one you think relies on you, in favor of the one I have been funding for the last decade. This was the core betrayal. Not the taking of the money, but the deliberate, calculated plan to punish the provider while rewarding the dependent, based on a convenient, self-serving lie. Mom finally looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes, not of regret, but of shame at being exposed. It wasn't a punishment, she stammered. We just thought, you're so responsible, you're fine. I was responsible because I was constantly trying to make up for the gaping hole in your security. And I was fine because I worked twice as hard, not because you set me up for success. You were punishing my silence. You mistook my sacrifice for stability and my quiet consistency for passive reliance. I picked up the sheet of paper and folded it carefully back up. I'm leaving now. I won't be back for the next holiday. As I walked toward the door, Mom finally managed a plea, a choked sound. Wait, what about the house? Who's going to handle the bills next month? I stopped, turning back to face them one last time. This was the moment of complete clarity. They weren't asking me to stay for love. They were asking me to stay for the ledger. That, I said, looking from my mother to my father, who was hiding his face in his hands, is a problem you're going to have to figure out on your own. It's time for you to stand on your own 2 feet. I walked out, leaving the house, the money, and the silence behind me.
Driving away from that house felt like cutting a cord that had been wrapped around my heart for 20 years. It wasn't freedom. It was pure, unadulterated emotional exhaustion. I drove until the holiday decorations turned into ordinary streetlights, and I found myself pulling over on the side of a dark road, the printed statement still burning a hole in my pocket. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply sat there, feeling the profound silence of having finally spoken the whole ugly truth. It felt less like victory and more like surgery without anesthetic. I thought about the years I spent watching them live comfortably while I postponed my own dreams. The small condo, the travel, the financial ease, all because I was the shadow banker. The true loss wasn't the money, it was the stolen future I had traded for their illusion of stability. The fallout was immediate. Dad sent a flurry of texts later that week, none of them apologizing, all of them asking about next steps regarding the property tax bill. Chloe sent one text accusing me of ruining the holidays and being cold-hearted. Mom called, but her voice was tight, still trying to negotiate my return to my old silent role. I responded to none of them. I finally practiced the silence they had perfected. My phone stayed quiet, and I felt a strange sense of peace settle in, a peace that came from the lack of obligation. I was no longer waiting for the next emergency call, the next subtle plea, the next bill I would quietly cover to keep the family myth alive. It took 6 months of zero contact for the first genuine conversation to happen. It was Dad. He didn't call, he sent a long, typed email. He didn't apologize for his actions, not directly, but he apologized for his blindness. He admitted that my mother had genuinely convinced herself I was doing well enough to not need the trust, and that the narrative of me relying on them was easier than confronting the reality of their own dependencies. It was the closest I ever got to an acknowledgement of the betrayal. The truth is, I never wanted the money back. The money was simply the physical manifestation of my emotional debt to them, a debt I felt I owed to keep the peace. The real cost was the relationship, and that was gone. I spent a lot of time reflecting on why I stayed quiet for so long. It wasn't just martyrdom, it was fear of confrontation, fear of breaking the fragile peace that was my entire familial identity. I didn't return to the family orbit. I changed my holiday traditions. I finally took that vacation I'd postponed, and I bought that small condo. I realized the profound moral lesson in all of this. Silence is not always a virtue. Sometimes it is a currency that allows others to devalue your worth. My quiet help allowed them to write a version of the family story where they were the generous protectors, and I was the dependent, and they were ready to punish that lie. I learned that true family honor isn't about blind sacrifice, it's about mutual respect. And if you have to choose between keeping your truth and keeping your peace, always choose your truth. The peace you find afterwards is real, earned, and no longer conditional on someone else's comfortable delusion. The emotional closure was finally complete when I accepted that they couldn't give me the respect I deserved, and that it was I who had to give myself that respect. I didn't get a revenge fantasy ending. I got something far better: closure. The last I heard, Chloe found a new roommate, and my parents had to take out a small loan to cover some repairs. They are managing. They are surviving. They are finally standing on their 2 feet. And so am I, for the very first time. I didn't ruin the family. I just stopped being the only one who held the pieces together. And that, it turns out, was the greatest act of self-love I could have ever performed. I'm not carrying them anymore. I'm just carrying myself. And that's enough.